Thank you, Alexei. I now hand you straight over to Professor David Mנשרי.
Thank you. I think at this stage we are approaching the end of our 2 long days. The only good news I can tell you, I can tell you what Henry the Eighth told each of his 6 wives. I won't keep you long. And I'm trying to take one step further and not to speak about the future, but try and hopefully wrap up this discussion in looking at a wider perspective of Iranian history. And I think that faced with the challenge of modern style, Western style modernity, the Iranian ship of state in the last 200 years was fluctuating between extremes. From a vision of a monarchical system, a pre-Islamic history, territorial nationalism, Iran moved in the last 30 years to return to Islam, a policy, an ideology of supranational identity of the all unity of the Islamic Ummah. From pro-Western policy, it went to Islamization. From attempts to adopt Western civilization to the contrary. From the tradition of Persian culture to Islamic legacy, I can say in short, from the tradition of King Cyrus the Great to the heritage of Imam Ali. If you look at the last 2 or main 2 real powerful leaders of Iran in the second half of the 20th century, the Shah and Khomeini, their philosophies, ideology, policy is a mirror image of each other. The Shah was trying to push Iran toward nationalism, strengthening the monarchy, and stressing the unity of the Iranian nation. Ayatollah Khomeini was taking Iran to further fields of Islamic unity, unity of the Muslim Islamic community. The role model was different. One role model was Cyrus the Great. The other role model was Imam Ali, maybe even the Prophet Muhammad. What I try to do is just to trying very briefly to look at these 2 different basic poles of identity in Iranian history, Iranianism or Persian culture versus Islamism or Islamic philosophy. Now, when I speak about Islamic character of Iran, and immediately the question would emerge, what do we mean when we say Islamic? To what degree the Islamic Revolution was Islamic? And we were discussing the last 2 days about the Islamic Republic, Islamic philosophy, Islamic, everything Islamic today, Islamic terrorism, Islamic fundamentalism. What is Islamic in the roots of this movement? Well, it depends on your definition of religion. If you use Western terminology, Islam is religion is something very narrow. There is distinction between religion and state, religion and science, religion, so many different things in life. But if you use Islamic, or if you may, Jewish terminology, religion is everything. So if you use Islamic terminology, this was an Islamic revolution. It was social, economic, political, cultural, anti-imperialist. But if you use Western terminology, it was much more than Islamic, the religious movement. I happened to live in Iran the last 2 years of the Shah, and I always have to admit that had I been Iranian citizen in 1979, I might have well joined Ayatollah Khomeini. Not because of religion, I'm not religious, and not because of Islam, I'm not Muslim. Because life was miserable. People joined this caravan of Ayatollah Khomeini looking for hope that he will bring them, I almost say, to the promised land. And I think that if we agree with it, the final stability of the Islamic regime, therefore, does not depend to the degree of return to Islam, but rather to the degree that this Islamic regime will be capable of removing the main malaise of Iranian society, which initially led to the Islamic Revolution. And then I would add another question. To what degree the ideology of this movement is Islamic? Well, is there something that we can call this is the Islamic ideology? Well, of course there is. This is the Islam that Prophet Muhammad brought in the 7th century. But we don't live today as Jews, as Judaism used to be 3,000 years ago, and Christians don't live according to what Christianity was 2,000 years ago. Why should we think that Islam today is exactly what Islam used to be in the 7th century? We live today according to our interpretation of the principles of faith. And our interpretation vary from generation to generation, from place to place. It does not have to vary every generation, but there is a constant trend of change. And to use the words of Abdul Karim Soroush, one of the main Iranian intellectuals, one of the leaders of the Islamic revolution and the cultural revolution in Iran, and he says a sentence that for me it sums up all. He said, there is no one interpretation of Islam. There is no one interpretation that is better than other, and there is no final interpretation of Islam. And he added in a very courageous way, and there can be no official interpretation of Islam, namely that even an Islamic regime cannot come and tell you this is the real interpretation, the only interpretation. You have to accept it because I spoke with God last night or whatever. So today, if you just think about it, Khomeini came to power 30 years ago. There have been 7 grand ayatollahs in Iran. None of them supported Khomeini. The most leading ayatollah in Iran, 79, went to house arrest and he passed away 7 years later in 1986. Well, the man who was assigned by Khomeini to be his successor in 1985, Ayatollah Montazeri, doesn't have the freedom today to speak to his people. The most leading ayatollah in Shiite Iraq, Ayatollah Sistani, who is Iranian by origin, does not agree with Khomeini or Khamenei or almost anything. So what I'm trying to say is that even religion or interpretation of religion tend to change over time. And the third question would be to what degree the policy of the Islamic Revolution is faithful to the ideology with which they came to power 30 years ago. And what happened in Iran, and we keep hearing it the last 2 days, that there is a degree of change or deviation from dogma, retreat from the principles of the revolution. This happens in any revolution, if they really want to survive. In opposition, you say, you confess your ideology. You say what you wish to do. When you are in power, you only can do what you can do. And as Arik Sharon said, what you see from here, you don't see from there. From the chair of the prime minister, you see different things differently. With authority, often enough comes responsibility. And I think one thing that we heard the last 2 days, that this regime, no matter if they deserve or not to have nuclear capabilities, they are by and large responsible. So this is the framework of what I think about the Iranian policy. And I see a gradual change in the policy. And I don't want to go deeper into showing how the interest of the state, as interpreted by the Islamic rulers of Iran today, have taken supremacy over the philosophy of the revolution. I would say, and I agree with what Ephraim Halevi said earlier, the people in Iran do not retreat from dogma voluntarily. No ideological movement upon taking power asks himself in the morning, well, what can I do today against what I promised to the people? No, they wake up and they want to do what they promised. But where there is a clash between ideology and interest, often enough, and in the case of Iran, almost each and every case, interest won over ideology. Well, one simple thing, the first day of the revolution, how you call this piece of water dividing between Iran on the one side and the Arab countries on this other side. The Persians call it Khalij Fars, the Persian Gulf. The Arabs call it Al-Khalij al-Arabi. And when an Ayatollah came to Iran and proposed to Khomeini to call the Gulf of the Muslims, Khomeini refused. They said the Gulf has been Persian and remain Persian. This is national interest of the state. This is not Islamic philosophy and not what Brenda was mentioning us today. No, there are no Afghans, there are no Kurds, no Turks. All are one ummah. I could have gone to show that Ferdowsi's is being still very much cherished in Iran and being taught in schools. And he wrote the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. Hafez is being taught in school. English is the second language in Iran. To the degree that every book of English, there is on the cover or the first page, explanation, why do we have to teach our children the language of the great Satan? And we saw the Parsikola and other things from Leora's talk this morning. And by the way, although the Parsikola was established by the Revolutionary Guards near Mashhad, it was not that successful because they wanted the real thing, not Parsikola. So and I think that you can think about almost every issue in Iranian politics. You can see that there is whether there is a clash, they opt for interest. But the question is the question of price that you have to pay. But when you start thinking about the price, you are already pragmatic. And if you think about Iranian pragmatism, the very fact that you think how much it costs, it's not anymore a question of principle, but question of price. And the Iranians are very much careful not to pay more than it's necessary. And right now, until now, they have been very successful. When there were disagreements between institutions of power in Iran, Khomeini formed a council that I just ask you to think about the name of this council, Shorai Tashkhis Maslahat Mamlekati, a council defining the state interest, the interest of the state, namely that they have to consider the maslaha that was mentioned here so often this morning. And what is maslaha? And excuse me for saying maslaha because I don't say like the Persians maslahat, because I studied Arabic before Persian. So the maslaha, which is Islamic principle, it is such a heavy thing in Islam. And Khomeini, before his death, of course before his death, he said he issued a fatwa. He couldn't have issued a fatwa after. But before his death, he issued a fatwa in January 88, in which he said that for the sake of maslaha, it is okay for Islamic government to destroy a mosque and suspend the 5 Arkan al-Islam, pillars of Islam. It's a very, very strong statement. And I hope not many people will hear me about it, because what he meant is the maslaha is more important. And maslaha is to defend the interests of the Muslims and to defend the interests of Islam, the way you interpret it. So this is the way I look at Iran. And here I want to surprise you and try and conclude. Over 100 years ago, Mustafa Kemal in Egypt was entertaining with this question of al-wajib, as the Egyptians said, al-wajib al-watani, al-wajib al-dini, the Islamic or the religious duty and the national duty, trying to show that their two terms are, as Professor Marashenko was suggesting, more complementary than contradictory. But when you look at E.G. Brown, one of the greatest scholars of Iranian history, who at exactly at the same time, the turn of the 20th century, between the late 19th, early 20th century, E.G. Brown said at that time in Iran, no one even raised the question if there is a contradiction between nationalism and religion. They are obviously very complementary rather than contradictory. And I think that what we see 30 years after the Islamic Revolution, that not only that the Iranian culture is based on these two major principles of nationalism and Islam. The Shah could not eliminate Islam, not even from the public sphere as much as he wished. Khomeini could not eliminate the Iranian identity and their loyalty to their culture. And you can see it on each and every step. But not only that we have these two pillars, and I think that recently there is a third pillar added, which is as strong as, not as strong as the others, but very strong. It is the influence of Western culture. And people ask, can the West come into Iran? Ladies and gentlemen, the West is already in Iran. And there is no way, actually, to get the West out of this Iranian loyalty. It is not as strong as Islam, God forbid. It is not strong as nationalism, but it's very influencing the way the Iranians act and they think. The Iranian people over the last 100 years or so struggle on two major issues, which I very briefly would call bread and freedom, welfare and freedom. They have not yet achieved this goal. The Islamic Revolution was another phase, I believe, to bring Iranian closer to their hope of achieving these two goals. There is no better social, or the social gaps in Iran are not better today than 30 years ago, in my view. And there is no much greater freedom today in Iran that used to be under the Shah. Although there are some signs of openness, and I always quote a good friend of mine, that an Iranian professor who once told me about this contradiction between a relative openness in Iran and radical or extremist suppression. And he said, you know, they say there is no freedom of expression in Iran. That's not true. We have freedom of expression. What we don't have is freedom after expression. So it is, in a way, that reflects what is going on in Iran. Under the Shah, to speak against the Shah was a crime. Today, to speak against the supreme leader is a sin. So which one of them is better? But the ultimate line, in my view, is that these are the two genuine most important. It's not return to Islam, but rather to achieve these basic aims of the Iranian people. And Khomeini's revolution was supposed to bring them closer to achieving such a goal. The final word would be that, in my view, Iran emerged triumphant. When you think about Iran and Islam, the Iranianism gained supremacy in Iranian policy than even religion. But the issue is that Iran today is being ruled by Islamic Republic. So I don't know what you do with this conclusion, but I think that's wrap up what I think is the situation in Iran today. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, in academic conferences, usually the last slot is called the graveyard slot because so few people actually attend. But the very fact that so many of you are here today, I think, testifies to the quality of the papers that we've heard over the last 2 days. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank David, his team here, as well as the panelists and your good selves for being such wonderful conference attendees. Thank you very much indeed. I now hand over to David for some final remarks.
I would like to give the final remarks to a good friend and that is sitting here, Sam Yivri, who came all the way from Los Angeles. But let me add a few things that I'm afraid even I didn't know how to say because I asked the names to be written. So there's so many people to thank. First, I must, as a disclaimer, to say many people said so many nice things about me. All the credit should go to the head of the academic committee of this conference, is Dr. Meir Litvak, who is sitting here. And he worked so hard with the other members of the academic committee, Professor David Yerushalmi, who is here, Dr. Uzi Rabi is supposed to be here, and Dr. Liora Hendelman-Barbour. We had a very, very difficult week here in terms of work. Our donor and co-founder of our center received a honorary doctorate with all the celebrations and festivities. We had a whole long week celebrating with Lord David Alliance. And then we started immediately. In between, we had the Board of Governors of the university, and now this conference. I think that the people who worked so hard deserve some rest, but I'm not going to give them this rest, and I'll tell you in a moment. But I want, before they say that all the work here, the administration was done in addition to a very loyal and faithful administrative assistant of the center, Doris Naor Klein, that she was with us the last 2 days, but in the middle of the day, her mother was rushed to hospital, and I forced her to go. She wanted to stay here. I told her, it's not your place, go to your hospital to be with your mother. The fact that everything ran well and you didn't even notice means that the administration was taken care of very well. And those of you who have been participants, who have been in touch with our people here, know that you have been speaking with our, basically with our graduate students. all the administrative work, including publishing the booklets and the brochures and being in contact with the speakers, and it's not easy task. They've been done with a group of graduate students who are, in addition to their dedication and really administrative support, they are very brilliant students, and you could hear some of them speaking today and yesterday, and I wonder what will happen in 10 years. Thanks God I won't be here. When there is a conference on Iran, you would not have to invite people from abroad with so many talents, young talents, educated today in this Tel Aviv University. You can make up with Tel Aviv University people. But I want just to mention the names of, all of them are PhD students. Brandon Friedman, who's sitting over there, and Tracy, Chelsea Mueller, Rachel Kantz, Ran Levy and Hadass Bahatzi, they are doing their master's degree, but they are also as useful, and Ori Goldberg, who is finishing his PhD right now. And finally, I want to thank, before I give the floor to Sam, I want to thank all our speakers who came from distant places and closer places, one with more miles, less miles, and for all their wonderful presentations, which really make me proud of the quality and diversity of views being raised and exchanged in the last 2 days. And I want to thank our faithful people sitting here in the crowd at the last moment for being here. Usually when I go to a conference, most of the conferences, at least at this university, when I go there, I am one of the younger people. And if you could notice, when you came here, that the majority of the people here are younger than I am. I passed the 30 years after. So it's refreshing to see the young people sitting here, and I think it is a very important achievement of our center. But then we have a group of people called 30 Years After. The name is meaningful. I'd let Sam maybe to say a word about it. I was invited in September to give a talk about Iran by a group that I didn't know until then. Well, they were very new at this time themselves, called 30 Years After. And I was invited to give a talk, I think 9 o'clock in the morning, Sunday morning, to young people. And I know what young people Sunday morning do. They don't go to lectures about Iran. And I entered this Beverly Hilton, I think, the hotel, when I saw 1,000 people, and I think that I will not exaggerate, 70% of them under the age of 30. I was thrilled, and I immediately offered them, let's do things together, and I'm so happy that they have been our partners in this endeavor to what we hope to will be from now on an annual Tel Aviv Iran conference, or hopefully the annual Tel Aviv Los Angeles Iran conference. Sam, please. Sam is this group, as far as I know, they don't have chairman, president. There is a collective leadership. I don't want to say it like any. He's the president now. You adopted it to realities. Okay, so they changed since because whenever I speak with Sam, he said whatever Jonathan say whatever the other says, and always there is agreement between them. There is a really good understanding between them. And Jonathan is a graduate of Yale University, and he is a graduate of law school in the University of South California, USC, that usually would not be confused with University of South Carolina, and the university that usually in Israel they used to call them, I know they call them in America University of Spoiled Children, but here they're known better as University of Saudi California.